12. Luke chapter 12. And we are continuing our series, Designed to be Different, talking about dressing appropriately as a godly person. Luke chapter 12, verse 23 is our text. So if you have found your place, let's stand together as we read Luke chapter 12, verse number 23. The life is more than meat, and the body is more than raiment. And let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this time we can meet together and study your word. We pray that you would help us, that we would understand the truths your word teaches. Help us to apply these things to our own lives. And Lord, that you might be pleased. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. Also, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10 say, in like manner also women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broidered hair, gold or pearls or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. And then we also read this last week in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 21, where it says, unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skin and clothed them. And so we see, and we looked at some of this last week, we saw that the way you dress matters to God. Well, it doesn't make any difference what I wear. It's what I want, and that's all that really matters. No, what you wear really does matter to God. Just as anything else in your life, God doesn't want your apparel to be done on a whim. He has some things to say about it, and some things that we've talked about, some things else that will add to it. We also saw that the way that you dress identifies your character and your level of respect. And anyway, we'll talk more about some things having to do with that here as we go on. Also, we saw last week that the way that you dress shows your honor for God, or should always honor God. And so we talked about that last week. So we're going to pick up here at the bottom of page 18, and we're going to see that the way you dress should always be appropriate to the occasion. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse number 5. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse number 5. This verse says, the woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. And there are a lot of things that God's talking about in this verse. But part of what God's saying here is that you need to dress appropriately for your gender as well as for your circumstances. There are clothing styles that are feminine. There are clothing styles that are masculine. And there are also different occasions where you may dress differently. But whatever the situation, you need to strive to be appropriate for that situation. One thing that I saw years ago, I was reading some material about doing a job interview, going to a job interview, not actually being the one giving the interview. But when you go for a job interview, one thing that they said is, dress appropriately for the type of work you're applying for. So, for example, if I was going to go apply where Brother Wolf works, now at Lafarge, I wouldn't be dressed like I am right now. That would sort of be inappropriate, right? Because driving a cement truck, this is just not the kind of thing that you wear. It's not appropriate. And so, anyway, that's what they were saying. And it's true. It's absolutely true. Again, I wouldn't dress like this going to try to apply for a job as a roofer. I just wouldn't do it. However, when I went to apply to work at a bank, yes, this is how I dress. I did not necessarily with the suit coat, but at least shirt and tie. is how I dress for the interview, because that's appropriate for that particular situation. Yes? Is everybody with me? Okay, because if you're not with me now, you won't be with me later. So let's talk about this. Talk about how to do appropriate things. So here's at home. First of all, be modest. The thing is, God talks over and over throughout the Scripture about being modest. Just because you're at home doesn't change that. Well, the neighbors don't see me. Just because you're at home doesn't change what God said. God didn't give you one thing for outside and another thing for inside. God didn't do that. Now, you should be modest, be covered, and be appropriate across genders. Don't say, well, it's just my brother, it's just my sister, therefore I can run around in just my underclothes. Don't say that. Because, look, that's how you learn how to deal with people of the opposite sex. Is at home. And if what you've been taught at home is that it's okay to run around with no clothes on in front of your siblings, that's what you're going to think is okay with everybody else. So it has to be taught at home. So, and that obviously should be encouraged by the parents. We had one of the three siblings that we have in our house when they were younger. When it was time to change their diaper, they thought that, well, hey, you took the diaper off, you cleaned me up, I'm done. And, you ever try to catch a pig, when he's running around? I mean, that's kind of what it was like some days, trying to catch whoever that was. Now, I'm not going to tell you who it was, and nobody else in the family is going to tell either, I know, so you'll never know. But somebody had to be taught, because somebody thought it was okay. And they did learn. I'm glad to tell you that whoever it was did learn. And they don't do that anymore when we change the diaper. Here's the other thing about being at home. When you have friends over, be as appropriately dressed with them in your home as you would if you were out. Oh, but wait a minute, this is just what I wear around the house. Not when you have other people over. Is this sinking in? We need to learn to be appropriate at all times and in all situations. At church, be more respectful to God than you would be at any other occasion. I believe that's true. I believe that we ought to be more respectful when we come to the house of God than any other occasion. Look, if we were going to have the Prime Minister come and meet with us, which he hadn't called my number yet, so I'm not expecting that. But if he were to come, you know that his aides would come in and tell us that there is a dress standard. We have to dress appropriately for someone of that high standing. And I don't care who the Prime Minister is. I don't care if it's Trudeau or whoever wins the next election. I mean, if it's him or something else, eventually it will be somebody else. It doesn't matter who it is. Just because it's someone from that office, you would show respect in the way you dress. Well, God is a whole lot more important than the Prime Minister. Whoever fills the office, that's regardless of that. And we ought to be more respectful to God in the way that we dress when we come to church. Remember, it's not about what God will accept. It's about what God deserves. What does God deserve from you? Well, there's a couple answers that we could come up with. First of all, God deserves everything. Second of all, God deserves your best. That's what God deserves. And so when we meet together, we ought to come together showing respect to God by doing our best. And you say, well, what about people in other places who don't have what you have? I'm glad you asked that, because I've lived in other places where people didn't have what they have here. And you know what I taught them? I taught them exactly what I'm telling you right now. I told them, you do your best. Well, what if they only had one set of clothes, which they did? Most of them only had one set of clothes, because if they had two, he would come steal it. Oh, well, there's a shirt, there's a pair of pants, they're not using it, so I will. I kid you not, that's what went on. And so, you know what they would do? Saturday, they would go down to the river, which for them was an hour walk, and they would wash their clothes, and they would take a bath, so that come Sunday, they could give their best to God. I appreciate that. I really do. And I believe God's pleased with that. Now, here, we have more than one set of clothes. I know this, because I've seen most of you outside the church. And what you're wearing right now is not what I've seen you wear at other times. So I know you have other clothes. But I'm saying, we always want to give our best to God. And that's what God should get from every one of us. So let's talk about at school. We should honor the standards and guidelines set up by our school. You know, I've been in all different kinds of schools, secular and Christian and so on. And they all have some sort of different standard. Now, some have less than others, some have different than others, that's fine. But you should, as a student, always honor those guidelines instead of trying to push the envelope, which some people try to do. And what that is, that's basic submission and obedience. That's what that is. And God's going to really bless you for having the right attitude. As we'll see in just a minute, that's an important thing, is for us to have the right attitude in the area of our apparel. That's extremely important to God. Let's go on. At activities or in public, remember that God cares about how you dress, and what you wear reveals what's in your heart. You need to think about that. If I put this on and go outside like this, how is this going to, what is this going to say about my relationship with God? Seriously, you ought to think about that. And then remember, too, that you're Christ's ambassador wherever you go. How am I reflecting Christ? Am I reflecting on Him well, or am I reflecting on Him poorly, wearing the apparel I'm wearing? And we ought to think about that as well when we're talking about visitation, because, again, that's an activity we're doing in public, and we're doing it on purpose as an ambassador for Christ. So how should we dress then? Should we wear a suit and tie? Not necessarily, but we ought to dress appropriately to reflect Christ, so that people see us, and when they see a flyer or when we knock on their door, they're not going to, who's this bum that's knocked on my door, panhandling or whatever. So anyway, we need to consider that. At work, honor those in authority in your workplace without compromising your standards. As a Christian, here's the thing. If your job requires you to dress less decently than God desires, you should be willing to lose that job and allow God to provide you with another one. Because there's no other job to be had. I've heard that before. I have to dress this way because there's no other job to be had out there. And I have found that to be untrue, if you're really honest about it. At special events, weddings, funerals. We were just at a wedding last week. And I've been to a lot of funerals, and people do dress differently, don't they? And we should. We should dress appropriately for the situation, to show respect for those hosting the event or those being honored, those attending the event, and so on. Let's look over to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. The way that you dress should not directly identify with the world. It shouldn't directly identify with the world. Ephesians 5 and verse number 8 says, "For you were sometimes darkness, but now are ye light in the Lord. Walk as children of light." So in other words, the way that you walk, it's not talking about physical walking, putting one foot in front of the other. It's talking about our lifestyle. It's talking about the way that we live. The way that we live should not reflect the old life. The way that we live, the choices we make, should reflect our new life in Christ. And so that's what it ought to be. And so our dress, obviously, is going to be incorporated in that. It shouldn't directly identify with the world. It should be different. So there have been people of God who have not been willing to identify with him. In Zechariah chapter 13 and verse number 4, and it shall come to pass in that day that the prophet shall be ashamed to every one of his vision when he hath prophesied, neither shall they wear a rough garment to deceive. So they changed the way they dressed because they didn't want to be identified as a prophet anymore. They didn't want to be identified as a Christian. They wanted to identify with the world instead of identifying with the Lord. In Zephaniah chapter 1, in verse number 8, it says here, and it shall come to pass in the day of the Lord's sacrifice that I will punish the princes and the king's children and all such as are clothed with strange apparel. And so there have been people who've been turned away from God. And God identifies their wandering heart by the type of clothing that they wear. Oh, God doesn't care what kind of clothes I wear. Well, then why did he call this strange clothing? Why did he do that? Why would he use that word? The word strange here, it has to do with a variety of degrees. It reveals a number of things, from foreign to, which is just odd, to adulterous to outlandish. There are some people, they wear clothes just because it's weird and different, right? They go pick styles just because it's going to get attention. Well, guess what? That's not the kind of thing. God calls that strange clothing, strange apparel. That's not what a Christian ought to do. We're not around to get attention for ourselves. That's not what it's all about. And we need to be willing to let God make choices when it comes to our apparel. These verses provide a clear application. When you're loving and living for God, your dress is going to reveal it. But when you're following the world and ashamed of God, your dress is going to reveal that as well. So you should ask yourself a question: does your choice of dress connect you more with the world or with Christ? Is it more like, what everybody else does, or is it more like what would be pleasing to the Lord? Back in Luke chapter 8, in verse number 35. Luke chapter 8, verse 35. Here we see that the way you dress should lead others to respect you more. Luke chapter 8, verse number 35. And then they went out to see what was done, and came to Jesus, and found the man out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed, and in his right mind, that they were afraid. People immediately formulate a respect level toward you based on how you're dressed. We say, oh, no, God, we believe in living in a world that's non-judgmental. Well, that's, let me tell you something. People who say that, they're not wanting you to judge them. That doesn't mean that they're not judgmental at all. Because usually, when you say, well, that's not right. Oh, you shouldn't be judgmental. You know what they're doing? They're being judgmental. So, you think, well, this world we live in, it's just not judgmental. You're fooling yourself. It's just not how it is. And the thing is, people do judge you by how you dress. They judge you by how you look. They do. It's just the truth of it. Now, does that mean we should dress for people? No. We should be dressing for the Lord. How it should please the Lord. But anyway, these people here in Luke 8, they were afraid because of the radical change in this man's life. He was possessed of devils, and the Lord sent those out, and his whole life changed. And they were afraid of that. But it's amazing how a clothed man changes people's perspective of the situation. They were afraid. Now, first they were afraid of him, but then now they're afraid of Jesus. And that changed. But nonetheless, when you learn how to dress appropriately and in honor to the Lord, everyone who comes in contact with you will respect you more. That is absolutely the truth. When you run around in torn up clothes, and people see you that way, they're not going to have a lot of respect for you. I'm just telling you. And I know that torn up jeans are in style. I don't care. I really don't. I know that. But when you run around in torn up clothes, people say, oh, this person doesn't care. And so they think less of you. But if you go around in patched clothes, because you wore your clothes and they got holes in them. You know, when I was growing up, my jeans had patches. Seems like they had patches when Mom bought them. And actually, sometimes they did because Mom generally bought my clothes from Goodwill. I almost never got new clothes when I was growing up. I'm not complaining about that at all. That was just life. That's how it was. So anyway, I had patches all the time, but you know what? What I had was clean. And what I had was in good repair. It was patched, you know. And so anyway, we need to understand that. And so we should dress in a way that people are going to have respect for us, rather than dressing down because that's in style to dress down and be sloppy. And people have no respect for that. Young people especially, all they want, you need to respect me, and start dressing like we should respect you. Seriously, stop dressing like a slob, and maybe some of the rest of us will have some respect for you. Just saying. That's just the thing about life, and something that we have to understand. The way you dress should influence others toward God. Look over in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse number 7. Here's a verse that people like to use. Oh, it doesn't matter what's on the outside because God sees my heart. That's true. God does see your heart. But we already saw that what's in your heart is going to be reflected on the outside. We've already talked about that. 1 Samuel 16 and verse number 7. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, nor on the height of his stature, because I have refused him, for the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, and the Lord looketh on the heart. That's right. Man does see on the outside, and God sees the heart. So it really shouldn't matter what's on the outside, right? That's not what God says. In Matthew chapter 5, verse number 16, the Bible says, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So what does that mean? While God sees on the inside, we need to make sure the outside is right so that our life glorifies God. Because people can't see our heart. All they see is what's on the outside. So we need to make sure that what's on the outside is reflecting what's in the heart so that God will be lifted up and glorified. Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2, verse number 12 says, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. Then over in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse number 12, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. So they may make fun of you for being a Christian, but you should live in such a way on the outside that they can't really have anything true to say. They're going to have to make something up. They're going to have to twist something to say something about you. So we need to dress in such a way that we can influence others toward God. And so our appearance always influences others. People base their opinions of your God. If you're a Christian, people base their opinion of your God on how you dress. Not just in church, but every day of the week. So you need to remember that. People judge your appearance, and they will judge God by your appearance. You never smile. You're constantly grouchy and grumpy. People are going to judge your God by that. Good. So, your God's apparently not making you very happy. And that's part of your appearance. I mean, because we don't wear clothing over our face. Some people I've seen, anyway, no, I'm kidding about that. Value your influence. Look, if you have an influence on others and you can point others toward Christ by your appearance, you should value that. Take advantage of that. Not to point toward you, but to point people toward the Lord. Do you value your good influence on others more than you value your right to wear whatever you want? You should. Decide that in the choice of your dress, you'll be a witness for Christ, not a witness for the culture. That's an important decision for every one of us to make. And then, the way you dress should show respect to godly authorities. Back in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17, says, "Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy, and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you." Back over in Exodus chapter 20, in verse number 12, the Bible says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." In the book of Ephesians chapter 6, I know I'm trying to go quickly here. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2, "Honor thy father and thy mother," which is the first commandment with promise. Verse 5 tells us, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, with singleness of your heart, as unto Christ." And then back over in 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse number 5. "For after this manner, in the old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands." So you realize all of these verses have to do with submitting, subjecting, surrendering to authority. Whatever kind of authority that is. Hebrews 13:17 is talking about spiritual authority, such as your pastor and so on. Obviously, Exodus 20:12, Ephesians 6:2 are talking about obeying your parents. In Ephesians 6 and verse 5, it's talking about being submitted or surrendering to your boss, as it were, on the job. And then here it's talking about, in 1 Peter 3:5, talking about the wife toward her husband. And many times, especially with young people, our dress is determined by those in authority over us. Like, when your kids were little. And I have a feeling that Awesome and little Robbie Jr., they don't get up and pick out their own clothes. I just have that feeling. So what they wear is chosen for them. And as kids get older, yes, they learn to dress themselves, and that's a wonderful thing. I remember when we had the three little ones, when the boys were little, and man, it seemed like we had to dress all three of them there for a while and put all their clothes on. And I told my wife, I'll be glad when we get past this stage and they can start dressing themselves. And she wasn't so sure about that. "Oh, but I want them to be little. I want to hold them." I said, "Yeah, but just think when they can walk and we don't have to hold them anymore." That's a good thing. And it's a normal thing. It's abnormal for a child to want to be held and carried all the time. That is abnormal. Anyway, so it's a good thing. Now I'm glad we don't have to bottle feed them anymore, all that sort of thing. And I think they're probably glad about that too. But anyway, when they're little, obviously we picked out what they wore. But now as they're getting older, they're starting to buy their own clothes. And sometimes they'll come home, "Hey, Dad, look what I got." And, there hasn't been anything that I've been bothered about. Not a thing. I've very good. The only problem I've had is they don't wear my size. Anyway, but, that's true with parents, and it's true sometimes with teachers and employers and so on. And it can be true in certain situations, certain places where the authority there says you've got to dress a certain way. And that's fine. That's how it ought to be. But that means that dress is often more about obedience than it is about fashion. And to be quite honest, as a Christian, that is what dress is all about. It's about being obedient to God and to the authorities that He set over us. More than it is, I can do what I want. I can dress like I want. I can be what I want. Really, it's more about being obedient. And that is the kind of heart that God is looking for. God's looking for a heart that will say, "God, I want you to choose what I wear, not me. And to be honest with you, in the spirit of that, if we want God to be in charge, I encourage you to go home, look at your closet, and say, God, is there anything here? According to these principles we've looked at, is there anything here that should not be here? That doesn't follow along with the spirit of all these different principles we've looked at. And if there is, being obedient to God, you should get rid of that. So let's go on to the next thing. Back over in Proverbs chapter 7, the way that you dress should encourage growth in you and others. Because we're going to see a couple principles here in Proverbs chapter 7 once I get over there. The first principle is that your dress and your behavior are interrelated. We like to think, or at least this world likes to tell us, that the way you dress and the way you act have nothing to do one with the other. But that's not what God says. It's not what God says at all. Here in Proverbs chapter 7, beginning in verse 6, we're not going to read all of this, but we'll start in verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths, a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner. And he went away to her street in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. And behold, there met him a woman with the attire of an harlot and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn. Her feet abide not in her house. Now is she without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, and I'm going to skip down, verse 21, with her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. Your dress reflects your behavior. As you read through the whole thing, she had the dress of an harlot. She had the behavior of one too. Because she said, oh, my husband's gone, and so it's okay for us. We can do whatever we want. It'll be fine. Nobody will ever know. And that's going to be okay. So your dress reflects your behavior, and your behavior is going to be reflected in your dress. Even secular studies reveal that if you dress well, you do well. In school, in sports, at work, when studying, when reading, and when walking with God. If you dress well, you're going to do well. The second principle is that your dress affects others and their growth. This woman who walked around with the attire of a harlot, she said, well, that's his problem because men have dirty minds. That's what our world tells us today. Women can dress any way they want because men have to control their urges. And, they're just animals and this, that, and the other. But the thing is, the way that you dress is going to affect someone else. It's going to affect whether they're drawn closer to God, or it's going to affect whether they're drawn away from God. And that's just the reality of it. In the passage we've read, the simple one was seduced by the immodest dress of this young woman. And the way that you dress, man or woman, doesn't matter, will directly influence others around you. So that means we have to be careful. And we just need to be careful about that. So choose to dress in a way that encourages your spiritual growth and encourages spiritual growth in others, rather than dressing in such a way that's going to draw them away. And then, lastly, the way you dress always reflects your level of spiritual maturity. I've heard people say, I've really grown in the Lord, and I've grown to the place where I can wear whatever I want now. Well, that tells me that you've grown away from the Lord. You may have grown, but it's the wrong way. Let's look at this in 1 Peter 3 and 4. Whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plating of gold or putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of the meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. So you see, what he's saying is, it shouldn't be the outward that attracts people's attention. It shouldn't be all the jewelry. Shouldn't be the way because you've got your hair 20 different colors. It should be what's inside. That ought to be what gets people's attention. That meek and quiet spirit that it talks about. Back over in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Verse number 11 says, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And that's true. It's true of our dresses as it is of anything. As we grow in maturity, as we grow in the Lord, there ought to be some things change. And of course, the way we dress is going to reflect that. So people who are completely taken up by how they look physically are focusing on the wrong part of life. And it's easy for young people especially to do, but it's not just young people. What they're showing is that they're spiritually immature. And your first concern should always be that your heart is right before God. That needs to be the first thing. As you grow in maturity, your clothing will simply be one of many ways that you choose to honor God outwardly. To show that in my heart I honor God, therefore, on the outside. So your dress is not a fashion statement, an identity crisis, or an attempt to gain popularity or acceptance. That's not what our dress is about. Your dress is the outward revelation of your spiritual maturity level, your heart for God and your relationship with Him. And that's the way it needs to be. There's coming a day when God Himself will literally determine exactly what we as Christians wear for all eternity. You go to the closet, everything there is going to be what God put there. You're not going to go shopping for yourself. You're not going to alter and adjust. It's going to be exactly what God has picked out for you for all eternity. Revelation chapter 4 and verse 4 says, and round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment. And they had on their heads crowns of gold. So God's going to do that. So submitting to Him now in the area of our apparel is really kind of preparation for honoring Him throughout all eternity. And then may what you put on every day from this point forward be a true and right reflection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Because we as Christians are supposed to reflect Christ in everything. In how we dress being one of those. So submitting your clothing choices to Him and letting Him be honored in your life should be a priority for you. Should be an important thing for each one of us. Let's stand together with our heads bowed and eyes closed.